Welcome back to Kintsugi Heroes, helping people tell the stories they need to share so you can find the stories that you need to hear. In this episode, John Millam is joined by Serena Lowe, who shares her journey from growing up in Singapore, following a planned career in law, and then eventually breaking away to find her own path. Serena describes how she felt trapped by expectations and the need for security. Through moments of reflection and personal growth, she discovered her passion for helping others, especially introverts, to find their strengths and confidence. Serena's story is one of moving from uncertainty to self-acceptance, showing how new opportunities can open up when we give ourselves permission to change. Enjoy this one with Serena Lowe.
Kintsugi Heroes fans and friends, welcome back to another podcast. This one is the Stories That Matter stream. And particularly just personally pleased to talk to somebody who I have spoken to many times before in some fashion, but not for quite some time. And I have to say, just my opinion. So this is, this isn't a sort of note in Wikipedia for your bio, but like my personal opinion is that my guest today, Serena Lowe, may be one of the nicest people I have ever spoken to. So, Serena, I don't know if that's a qualification, but it's certainly something that I get very excited to chat to. So thank you so much for joining us on Kintsugi Heroes.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, John. It's great to talk again.
Yeah, fabulous. And, of course, today we're talking, Kintsugi Heroes Stories That Matter is about stories that offer somebody's own path as a demonstration of for others to be inspired or to take useful wisdom or just maybe find out stuff about their own journey. And I think you are an incredible example of that, right? You're like your journey is particularly inspiring, not necessarily because it's like bombs and explosions and sort of transformations, but because it's so human in its in our search for exploring potential and opportunity and our real place in the world and our identity. Does that do you feel like it was a momentous journey, a journey of resilience?
I would say there have been some points where it felt quite momentous, and those were the ones where there was a lot of uncertainty because I had become very attached to having things planned, predictable, stable, and secure. And that's the kind of upbringing I had, the environment I was in, the conditioning. We don't really question that. It's all very unconscious. And it was only maybe 11 years into being a lawyer that I had this, perhaps an epiphany, but it was very troubling at the time because it had implications. And there was this concept of, what happens if plan A is not working out anymore, but I don't have a plan B? So the responsible thing to do, when you have a job, in a prestigious profession, when you've studied for it, is to keep going until you retire. But then one day in the middle of a meeting, the senior asked, have you any idea what's ahead of you if you continue on this path? And funnily, I had never thought of it. I had just assumed I would just show up day after day. This is my work. Maybe after a few years, they'll transfer me somewhere else, and I'll just keep going like that until I retire. And then at that point, I remember having this vision of being on a treadmill inside a golden cage. And for some reason, I was running, and I couldn't get off. And that really sparked a minor sort of moment of panic. Like, what is going on? What am I doing with my life? And what if I keep going like this and I'm forever trapped? And the more I thought about it, the more it became critical for me to do something. But the problem was, when you're used to, being inside that golden cage, it looks good on the outside to other people. It feels quite secure. You know what you're doing, and you don't have to think about the world outside. So the thought of stepping out of all that into what seemed like nothingness or uncertainty was terrifying, because I knew my identity was so bound up with the system, the trappings of success, the external validation, the title, the location of where I worked. Just saying, my name in relation to the organization, that was my whole identity. And I didn't know who I was or what I was meant to be doing outside of that. I had never given thought to it. So for the first time in my life, I had to ask myself, what is it I'm here on earth to do? Besides this thing that is very obvious, what if there is something out there that I'm meant to be doing, which I don't yet know about? Do I
Wow.
have the courage to go there?
Yeah. Well, it's amazing you say that. So for the context, right? Of course, you grew up in Singapore. So you're there's and I love that idea of Plan A, right? Was Plan A yours, right, or was it the plan that you stepped into? You assumed, like you've got, Singaporean parents are famous for their focus on achievement, and I'm guessing, given your history, that was similar. And of course, you're stepping into a legal profession. You trained as a lawyer, and you're working for the government, right? These are all very prestigious, but also very secure, and maybe not necessarily something you would be passionate about. So was Plan A yours, or were you meeting other people's needs?
Very good question, John. I think 70% of it was expectations and living up to those expectations. 30% of it was my own. I did actually pick law school over arts, but again, because of pragmatic reasons and the prestige of it. And the other thing was, there was also a personal element, a sense of personal autonomy, because I had come from a single parent home and I had seen my parents' marriage fall apart. So I was very keen to understand from a legal perspective what it's like, what family law is, and so on. And so that's why I also went down that path.
Wow, that's Maya Angelou. I often quote, if you want to find your purpose, look to your wound, and like what a kind of elegant solution for a young person unconsciously to go, wow, if we were better equipped legally, that whole experience, I might have had more control or more understanding around. Do you feel like that, the challenges of being a part of a family that breaks down, and you being somebody, organized and controlled and introverted, like, which we'll get to soon, that was that 30%, right? Oh my goodness, I can regain control by legislating the world.
Wow. Maybe I wasn't thinking about legislating the world, but definitely law would have given me the structure, the safety, a container of sorts that I could explore freely and figure out what the rules were. And maybe for someone else, I would be able to help them navigate that system.
You talk about the golden cage, a like beautiful metaphor. Why on earth would you step out of that? Yeah.
Because it's still a cage. And I realized after all the years of personal development work and reflection that what I really wanted was freedom, because it was the very opposite of what I had. And just being attached to this idea of certainty, security, that was the opposite. Freedom was almost something considered a luxury, and not something you aspire to. You aspire to success, you aspire to a name, social standing. You don't aspire to freedom.
Yeah.
Freedom is for people who don't have to live up to expectations, perhaps. It was just not a concept I grew up with.
Do you think freedom was irresponsible in some ways, coming from your worldview?
Yes, definitely. I
Yeah.
think there was a sense that freedom is for people who are not thinking hard enough or not being responsible, not mature enough, people who are reckless, people
Mm.
who haven't considered all the implications. So yes, there was that negative connotation.
Wow. So I love the idea of you, facing the big questions while you look around and recognise that what you thought was your solution is now a cage. What were you? What do you think was triggering? What internal motivation was being triggered by that feeling of being caged?
I think I wanted to prove to myself that I could survive outside of the system and outside of the cage, outside of other people's expectations. I
Right.
believed that there was a part of me that was bigger than all these things that I had been trying to achieve based on what was the norm, what was expected, what was respectable.
Mm.
Because in our Asian culture, you have to take into account how your parents, your community, your family think of, and how they look to other people. So it's very important not to make your family lose face,
Mm.
right? You don't do things that would bring shame or embarrassment to the family by going off the beaten path. So I had to be very careful there. And I didn't have any language around that. I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
have any mentors or anybody who was doing the same thing or had done that before. So I was pretty much on my own.
It's beautiful. There you are. And to be honest, like it's a pretty good wicket, right? Singapore is a great place to be part of that sort of mainstream, corporate, business, government, competency, professional world. Um, the risk would have started with something. So you recognise that the question invited a reflection. When did you know it was more important for you as the next person, the future Serena, to step out of that cage, to break through?
I think that moment in the meeting with that vision was the beginning of it.
So that was
And
so early in the contemplation.
it was. Perhaps it had been going on quietly in the background for a little while. I know that after I took a year off to stay home with my older child, it gave me the opportunity to clear my head. Just being away from the system, away from the workplace, I had finally some time to breathe and to think. And then when this happened, I had just gone back to work for 2 years. And so all this was happening quietly in the background and pretty unconsciously. But I noticed also that every time I went out to the bookstore, I would be looking in the personal development section. Certain titles would just keep popping up at me, and they were all to do with self-empowerment. They were to do with life purpose. Stephen Covey's books,
Yeah,
The Eighth Habit. You know that something is pointing you in a certain direction. And it's asking you, it's inviting you to make a decision about your life. But
yeah,
it's also terrifying because you have to carve that own path.
yeah.
There isn't a path already pre-laid for you, and there's no one to tell you this is the right path, this is the safe path. In fact, you are making it up as you go. And I had no clue how to do that.
I love the idea. Someone once told me about their obsession with shelf development. I realised that I was guilty of having a bookshelf full of those personal development things, and when I look at them, I can trace my interests in sort of growing and my challenges at the time to meet. Right, so whether it's connection, communication, whether it's procrastination, whatever. So I can completely understand that. When you talk about creating your own path, right? Being inspired by the gurus that we're sort of seeking in the bookshelf doesn't help on a practical term. How did you begin to solve those practical challenges of disentangling the expectations of everyone you were satisfying, and then start to pay attention to your own goals and vision?
Such a good question, John. There was no clear path. It was extremely messy, very non-linear. If I had, if I could draw it on a piece of paper, it's probably like all over the place. It doesn't look like it's making progress at all. Most of the time, it was like I'm starting from zero, and I no idea which direction I'm going. I'm not sure where forward is
Yeah.
or what the next step is. So I tried everything. I remember I tried freelance copywriting. Um, I joined BNI. I had
Mm.
no clue how to stand up and make an elevator pitch. I never made a pitch in my entire life. I had no network, no one to ask for advice. All right. What else did I do? I even tried network marketing for a very short time. That failed spectacularly because I had no clue how to sell. I was so uncomfortable just putting myself out there to ask, because I was always the one that dispenses advice, knows the answers, solves the problems. But suddenly I'm the one asking other people, hey, come and do this thing with me. And I realized I've been doing it the wrong way around, because I always needed to have the information first, and then I solve the problem at a very cognitive level. But life is so much more than just the head.
That's amazing. That's so true. And I had a vision of this big pond of failure, which I don't succeed until I've swum, well and truly, all through the pond of failure and challenge. Right. So, but of course, you are an extremely sort of capable and organised and talented person. So when did you start to feel like there was something in this that you could not just swim through that pond, but then start to really you know jump out and make it something significant?
I would say it was when I signed up to a life coaching program. And I did this for myself, not to be a coach, but to coach myself and get my own answers. And I remember sitting in the first month's worth of face-to-face workshops and thinking, oh my goodness, how have I gone through life without knowing any of this stuff?
Yeah,
And now suddenly my eyes are open, my brain is, alive. I feel maybe, I think I'm on track to something here. There's something magical happening here. Something's opening up, and I don't know what that is, but that was the beginning of that path of helping me figure out my purpose.
that's yeah. I love that idea. I had a similar experience. It's interesting though, because just as you said you were seeking experiences and exploring new knowledge, right? At that time, clearly you thought, well, my life isn't challenging enough. I better move countries. So, I love that you were testing, adding that complexity to your world to develop on it, right? What do we say? Like fail often, fail frequently, right? So, fail spectacularly. But, the challenge of moving to Australia must have been, was this an example of where you were going, or was this like saying, oh, let's just throw the model away?
It was actually very much part of that whole transition. So I basically compacted two major life transitions into 2 years. So first I quit law and I was trying to figure out what to do. And then we decided to move to Australia. So all that happened very quickly. And so, of course, when I've just landed in Australia, I am again starting from zero. But hey, this time I've done it before. I just did it the year before. So I
Yeah.
have some idea of what that feels like, to be the outsider, to be the newbie, to be the clueless one. And this time, because I was about to give birth to my second child, it was just more sensible to spend some time at home,
Mm.
for
Yeah.
a few years, being the stay-home mom. So that also bought me some time to figure things out and acclimatize to my new culture, new environment, and figure out how things work in Australia.
And you'll have to let me know how that happens, right? I'm still, I think, still trying to work it out myself, right? But I am so glad you did, right? Because you're in our world now, and we get to talk to you. But the interesting thing is, do you think you had, like, there's so many challenges you're throwing up in front of you and challenges that you're walking into, right? It's not like life is beating you up, like in some ways you're inviting that level of disruption. You've got relationships around you that are important to you. How do you think they went when you just invite saying, hey, by the way, everything you know about me, I'm just changing?
I don't think I ever gave anyone any heads up like that.
Yeah.
But over time,
That's a bit of the process we sometimes forget to do, right?
yes, I actually, now that you mention it, I completely forgot to notify anyone and everyone that I was embarking on this massive personal development thing. Mind you, I don't think anybody would have understood it anyway, because my circles were, all the similar kind of values at that time before my transformation, right? So still on the path of the plan A, still,
Yeah.
progress linear.
Yeah.
So if I had tried to say that to anybody, nobody would have understood. And till today, I don't think my husband entirely understands what it is I do.
Right.
Yes, and I don't try to explain it either,
Yeah.
because it's just really difficult to concretize.
Yeah. I've always fascinated. For me, it was always, there was a level of I'm adopting a language that I wasn't completely comfortable using, right? Like because of my own, corporate sort of, like this isn't real, right? Do you like the idea of heart-based connections and being inspired from both the unconscious and the conscious, right, and working outside, maybe spiritually or whatever? Did you embrace that straight away? Because your background is particularly cognitive,
You're
and
very right.
so how did you go about really embracing the other that comes with this often comes with this personal development journey?
I think the further I went into it, the more I realized this actually sits better with me than I thought it would.
Yeah.
I'm really surprised. Something very unusual is happening. It's almost like you're going over to the dark side. and, and you
From,
don't
a,
dare tell anybody.
from an accountant's point of view, or a lawyer's point of view, that's probably what they see in some ways, right?
Yes. So it was a good thing I didn't mention it to anybody what I was doing.
So when you learn things around personal development, doing a coaching course and so on, you both visibly transform. Leave legal, you focus on other jobs, right? But what happens inside is you're transformed as well. Was that something that you noted? Were you aware of that transformation? And how did that manifest? Did you become a better person? Did you become a happier person? What's in it for us?
What's in it for us? I think at the start it was a bit confusing. It was like I had a double identity. So on the outside, I was still a regular person with very mainstream ideas, but then I became less and less mainstream. And then it became more and more lonely, because it's not easy to find people who resonate on the same level, who are interested in the same things, especially when they are not the things that most people talk about. It's not on the news, it's not on social media, it's not what people talk about when they're picking up their kids from school. And so I started to feel less and less like I belonged, and that I needed to find my own new community, create my own tribe, and go where it was easier to have those conversations.
Yeah, that's really insightful. Creating your tribe. When did you step into the sense of, oh, this is something I can do? I have the agency and the responsibility to bring others into my world, right? And as someone who is potentially leading, serving, you know.
I think it started quite early, because I remember our trainer in the coaching program encouraged us, those of us who felt we liked this this new modality, and we could go somewhere with it, to go out and actually start spreading the word, doing the work. So I remember a period I got very enthused and I was talking to my fellow school parents and running workshops in community centers without a clue as to how to do any marketing, any promotion, no networks whatsoever, just sheer enthusiasm. And that was the beginning of it. And so lots of mistakes along the way, but just that passion to share this new knowledge, because to me it was, how is it that this is not more widely available?
Yeah.
Why is it that not more people are talking about this? This is life-changing. This changes the way I parent. This changes the way I see myself. This changes the way I interact with other people and how I move in the world. So why aren't we talking about this stuff more? So out of that enthusiasm, that's when I started doing my own version of spreading it.
Wow, that's brilliant. The idea that when what's interesting, you mentioned the commercial challenge, right? How do you turn this into a way of life that is sustaining, right? But also there's the aspect, right? Is there a calling? Is there a mission in that, like a sense of purpose? How do you find that as well, and then honor both of those things?
I think the honoring the purpose was much easier. It was keeping it sustainable that wasn't. Because from a practical point of view, if you have no clue how to run a business, if you have no, let's say, exposure to entrepreneurship in your own family, so there are no role models, if you also are someone who feels very uncomfortable about putting yourself out there to go and do the networking, the small talk, the presentations, the sales, no clue, and you're nervous about all that stuff, so you keep avoiding it, that really doesn't help as well. So actually there's a whole set of other skills that we need to acquire alongside the transformation to make it sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. And the idea that I walked away from that whole cognitive business, commercial, corporate view, but we have to come to some accommodation with it to be sustainable. Is that like a dissonance, or is that something that we can actually embrace as part of our going forward in service?
I think there's so many ways you can embrace that. I've learned that whatever I did in my previous career, a lot of it is transferable, a lot of it is useful.
Yeah.
So don't throw everything away all at once just because you're going on this new venture. Look at whatever you've learned, whatever you've experienced, and pick out all those things that are still useful. For instance, the structures, the systems, the processes. When you're trying to do everything yourself, you wear all the hats. You are your own marketing agent, you are the CEO, the finance officer, and everything. But when you think back to being part of a corporate, they had systems and processes for everything, right? Everything's documented. Everything is done according, this is how it's done, step 1, step 2, and so on. And so I had to learn the hard way to embrace that thing that I had conveniently, shoved aside, thinking, oh, it's no longer relevant to me. I have to embrace that as part of my new venture too.
Which is there's so much insight you've offered around that whole journey to position yourself, if you will, in your new life. Tell me about your new life, right? You embraced, eventually came to this point where you realised that there was a requirement. Your experience as a introvert, right, was something that you needed to help others with as well. So the quiet warrior, which I love, by the way, which is your your website and tag. How did was being an introvert something you recognised early on? Was that always, oh, that's me, or was this a revelation?
I think I always knew it. I knew that I was the quiet achiever because it was in all my school reports that I was conscientious, but I needed to participate more in class discussions. That I was a good worker, but not very confident. A bit shy and all that. And it's just consistent. And I think the thing that got me looking in this direction from a business perspective was attending all these traditional networking events, business networking events, where they tell you need to work the room, you need to hand out your business cards. You need to stand up, do your 30-second elevator pitch, and all kinds of things that just sat really uncomfortably with me as an introvert. So I remember walking into this one function room, hovering on the threshold, just looking in, like 60 to 80 people, loud music, everyone in little knots. They all seem to know each other. Where do I insert myself? Who do I talk to? Shall I just stand here in the corner and just, take care of my drink and just observe and go? Or maybe I should just go right now, just turn around and go home, because it was just so overwhelming. For one solid year, I took the prevailing marketing advice to put yourself out there and did all that stuff, right? Driving sometimes 1.5 hours across town to attend activities on the other side. And then I thought, hang on, why am I doing this to myself? There has to be a better way to network. Surely there must be alternatives. Somebody must have thought of another way to network for people who are quiet. So I went looking online for groups, didn't find anything. But I did stumble upon this app called Meetup. And it looked very interesting because it connects people based on common interests. So if you like hiking, there's a hiking group for you. And I thought, well, I wonder if there is anything for introverts. And there wasn't. And I thought, I wonder if I could start something. Would anybody come? Maybe they're all introverted. They won't show up either. And then I had this other idea. I think at the time you needed 50 people to start a group. That was the requirement. And I thought, well, if I don't get the 50 people, the group doesn't start and nobody needs to know about it. So that felt very safe, right? So let's go ahead and start that group anyway.
That's the introvert's idea of advertising, right? So, if no one knows about it, we're successful, right?
That's right. And so we started on a winter's day. This was 2017, I think. And I thought, well, let's see if anybody comes up. And I was sitting by myself in this upper level of this Italian restaurant. And 14 people, complete strangers, showed up. When it was so cold outside, it was like beanie and gloves kind of a day. And I just looked around the table at all these people and I was just amazed. So I thought, well, here we are onto something. Let's find out. Let's just keep going. And so that went on. And then 2020 came around and the lockdowns happened. And so we had to stop all the in-person activities. And I thought, now what next? And so I thought, oh, well, we're all on Zoom, so let's pivot and do something else. So so that's when I started the two communities, introvert focused again, but this time to do with social confidence, social connection. And so those groups are still going till today. So now we have a hybrid, Zoom sessions as well as in-person sessions around Melbourne CBD. And that really helped build the community. And I realized there was such a great need. That introverts may be quiet, they may be shy, maybe anxious, some of us, but they also want connection that feels right and that feels safe.
Yeah. I love the task. In another aspect, I facilitate an online men's anxiety support group, which I think is really the definition of optimism, right? I want to facilitate a group to bring people in who are socially anxious, right? So, and I think you've just embraced this, a similar level of unlikeliness, in that let's get this really a external connection session for, at least from my perspective, it seems unlikely. We bring a whole bunch of introverts together and create a connection. Like you said, oh, well, if it doesn't work, that's okay. When it did work, were you surprised? Was this about something, recognizing that there was a more introvert, actually has is more human than sort of, label, or it's not a problem. It's actually just an aspect of life and just needed some sorting out. Is that where we're going with this?
Yes. There's so much more awareness now than, say, 10 years ago. A lot more people are in this space, a lot more awareness of what an introvert is, and that it's not a weakness. It's even the label itself has restrictions, because sometimes we we fixate on the label and we think, oh, well, I'm an introvert, I can't do public speaking, I can't go to networking events and so on. So that's why I say, yes, we are introverts, and we are also capable of doing all the things that we need to do when the occasion arises. When that's why it's called the quiet warrior. We start off as quiet achievers, but sometimes it's not about us. Sometimes we need to speak up because somebody needs us to advocate for them. Somebody needs us to throw some light on something. And we happen to be in a uniquely powerful position to do that because the introvert's strengths, right? The quiet strengths of listening really well, being able to articulate a position after considering all the factors, and being deep thinkers, being very reflective and introspective, and bringing in that level of detail and that attentiveness to execution. So many fantastic strengths. So I say introverts, we underestimate ourselves a lot and we undervalue ourselves. So instead of saying, I can't, let's acquire those skills, because a lot of this is learnable. And that's the good news. So it's not something that I'm born this way, I can't do this stuff. No, it's actually having that growth mindset. I'm born this way. It just means I have a preference for doing things in a certain way, and I can create the conditions that support me to do things well, that support me to flourish.
Wow. When an introvert flourishes, is it something like, often people who do, we reward extraordinary activity. We often are thinking, we're a culture that focuses on exceptionalism, right? Do you think introverts are doing something exceptional when they sort of show up, or is it actually introvertedness, is just an aspect of living that isn't, that can offer a range of opportunities, and it's a way we see the world rather than be held back by it.
I think introversion is one way to see the world. And the only reason it's perceived as a weakness or as something to be fixed is because we are functioning in a mostly extrovert biased culture,
Yeah.
where there is a lot of emphasis on being outgoing or loud or dominating conversations, or very almost a pushing kind of energy. Whereas the introvert is more subtle, more discreet, more, the energy is just quiet, it's calm. You don't notice it, but you do feel the impact. When an introvert speaks up in a room after having considered, listened to everybody else, and then they say something, what I've noticed is it's very impactful. People actually stop and listen, and they realize that person has just said something really profound or really wise, or just summed it up really well, listened to everybody's perspectives and so on. But the introvert chooses not to speak just for the sake of speaking. So it's usually after some consideration, some time processing all the thoughts and filtering and taking into consideration, or reading the room and so on, and then they drop that thing. And that's one of their superpowers.
That's amazing. When I think back to what you were saying, when the picture of you, going to that event and being overwhelmed by all of this activity in the room, that is, as you said, has this extrovert bias. The aggressive networking of this. How did you now, go into that and own and be effective in that room? Because that was their way and you found another, and now you're sharing and helping people find that also. What is that other in that same vision? You now walk into that same room. What's different?
What's different is the energy that you bring to the room. So you start off prepping yourself and allow for your battery to be drained for the next, let's say, 2 hours, and be very conscious of it. Be very mindful. Know that it is happening and don't freak out because of it. Because that's exactly how the introvert's wired. When we are with people, our social battery goes down, whereas the extrovert, it goes up.
Yeah.
So know your own battery. So I tell my introverted community members, I have a battery of 2 hours. At the end of 2 hours, I will be completely exhausted. I will have no words left. So if you need to leave before the activity is done, simply stand up and say, I need to go now. And there's no need for any long explanations or apologies or anything like that. So now they are used to it. They've gotten very good at saying at the 90-minute mark, thank you for organizing. It was a great activity, but I have to go now. And so it's giving them back that power, that agency. So you don't feel that I have to suffer through this thing for the next 3 hours and hang out with all these people and feel oppressed, right? So you take charge of the conversations that you have. So I always say, set yourself some really small goals, very micro goals that feel manageable. So if today you decide to talk to just one person, have one quality conversation, maybe next time you can have two. Another time you can have three. Just keep an eye on that battery, notice your own state, and then do it from that empowered place instead of, oh, what shall I do now? What shall I do now?
Yeah.
So you go in there with a sense of purpose and focus on your strengths. So if you only like talking to people one-on-one or one in small groups, you can create that for yourself. You can also bring other people together, do that facilitator thing, because introverts are very good at that, the connecting part. So they don't have to dominate the conversation. They are happy to just listen, but they listen well. And they listen in a way that feels inclusive and feels safe for other people. So those are other ways to contribute to the networking environment as well. It's not just about me going and talking.
Absolutely. You, in some ways, I'm wondering. Like it feels like to introverted people are battling the stigma and the prevailing thought, the prevailing, ideology of networking and connection, right? And that stigma, is a barrier to expressing and being confident and setting your own boundaries and enforcing them. Is that what we're doing? And is it part of a sort of emancipated introvert to go, hey, I'm an introvert, stop treating me badly? Is that like that kind of advocacy? Is that part of our journey?
I think part of what it means to be a quiet warrior is indeed, yes, to have those boundaries, but also the quality of that self-acceptance. So I'm coming from a place of there's nothing wrong with me. I'm just have a different style of communication and my energy runs out. So I know I need to protect and preserve and maintain my energy by doing certain things and avoid doing certain things. So I advocate for myself, but not from a place of don't treat me badly, more like this is how I communicate. This is how I like to hang out. Let's do this. How about this? Have you ever thought of this? And I think the energy makes a lot of difference because when we are self-accepting, we come from that empowered place and peaceful place. We don't feel an urgency to have other people understand us completely. We are okay if there is a mismatch. We are just more aware of it. And we have some tools around it, some language around it. And we don't feel a need to fit in with everybody or to talk to the whole room or to collect a lot of business cards. What we want is quality, not quantity. So there are other ways to follow up after an event. You can always send someone a LinkedIn connection request, and then take it offline from there. And so there's so many creative ways. So just notice what works for you and just experiment with different things.
Nice. The the society tends to punish variation or differences through shame and sort of exclusion or pathologization. They were always trying to tell us we're broken in some way. And of course, that often contributes or goes on to some form of mental distress as well. So, anxiety and depression, situational anxiety, often comes from feeling like you're not good enough or you're not meeting the needs of society. Is introversion, being part of that stigma, part of that exclusion? And has that, is there an issue with helping people come out of feeling that they're pathologically broken, but they're not really? Is that your job, almost like your mission to restore people's sense of being whole?
Yes, there is some intersectionality there. I have spoken and worked with a lot of introverts, and when we explore more deeply, they start to connect the dots for themselves to things that happened in childhood, things that certain authority figures said to them when they were at a very impressionable age. Sometimes it's just throwaway statements that adults make without thinking, right? And we are all, we've all done that. And with some children, maybe if they are particularly sensitive, or the tone in which it was said, or they needed something and they didn't receive it, some of these things become memories that become intertwined with their identity. And so what you said about, not feeling good enough, that could actually have a historical root cause.
Mm.
And when you go and look at that root cause, when you sit with it, listen to it, make peace with it, and then integrate, whatever learnings come up from there, and you take that, then you are able to move on with your life without still dragging that emotional baggage back from when a parent said something unkind when you were 7 years old. And all of us have some variation of that happening, but most of us are not conscious of it. So when we go back far enough and join those dots, we realize, yes, there is actually some work I need to do now that I'm 40, 50, whatever.
Mm.
And when that thing is resolved, it's not that it changes you and you become an extrovert. It's more to do with self-acceptance, self-compassion, a kind of healing and letting go and reconciliation. You can finally accept that that is also part of me. There's nothing broken about it. It's just that that particular part didn't receive the nurturing or the love that it needed at that age. And now it's okay because I've grown up, I'm mature, I can handle this thing now. And come with me. Come with me and let's face this thing together. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that invitation. Come with me. It's a personal invitation to yourself, right? So, which is the definition of growth, right? Yeah, like and our maybe our mission. Do you think, like you mentioned, often it goes back to, we can trace or things like from childhood and trauma pop up occasionally. You think it's nurture or nature that you are introverted?
I think it's both. I've interviewed people who started off as extroverts, and then somebody said something at a very crucial time in their development, and then they suddenly became introverted. And I've also heard introverts say that with time, they've learned to become more extroverted. So I think there's a lot of agency involved, actually. It's a spectrum that we move up and down. And the good thing is it's flexible. So we
Yeah,
can adapt to whatever the environment requires us to do. That's the amazing thing about being a human. So I think I see that as, not like I'm an introvert, so I'm always an introvert. Sometimes I can be social when the situation requires, but then I need to go and recharge. And the extroverted person might be able to say, I value that my introverted friend has this recharge time. Maybe I can also practice being a bit more mindful and listening more and having some quiet time for myself. And so we can learn from each other.
beautiful. As when we think about that, you mentioned your journey gave you new insights about, say, parenting, right? So, as a mother, and an introvert and a introvert advocate and serve, advisor, do you see things in your children that are that may have been something you struggled with yourself, and then are you more equipped now to help them through that?
Slightly more equipped now to help them. It's very much a two-way process. They also have to be willing to take on that responsibility of changing whatever needs to be changed. But yes, definitely from a parenting point of view, recognizing where I am possibly perpetuating things that I grew up with that was my default way of responding. Certain things that I might say, and then I have to catch myself very quickly. Oh, I'm about to become like my mother or something,
Yeah.
and be very conscious of that. Okay, this is coming out of that trauma response from way back, right? Let's interrupt that pattern. What can I do differently? How can I connect even more deeply and openly with my child? And I happen to have two introverted children as well. So we spend a lot of time having pretty deep conversations, but again, on their terms, because they're a lot older now. When they let me in, we can have a great conversation. And, when it's not, I don't have to take it personally. It's just give it time, let it flourish at its own pace.
Oh, that's beautiful. Do you Do you feel like it's a good thing or a bad thing to be introverted?
It's neither a good thing nor a bad thing. It's only seen as bad because the system or the culture has told us that, you need to be louder. You're too quiet. You need to speak up more. You need to come out of your shell. You need to come out of your comfort zone. But nobody's telling the extroverts to make that comfort zone possible,
Mm.
or to widen the space around the table, or to make room for quieter voices to speak up and not always have the same few loud people dominating the conversation who talk without thinking.
Absolutely. I often wonder, one of my particular challenges in life, right, through my neurodiversity is turning up on time to anything, right? And there's a huge response to that. People, will be very aggressive about someone who is late, right? So they'll, lack of respect, lack of attention to detail, right? It's like a character flaw. And I always think, one day it happened. I was coming there, and like, this isn't an excuse. It doesn't happen every day. I'm late quite happily on my own. But I remember being held up by somebody in need. Right, they had an accident and they were hurt, and I needed to. I was connecting with them, and caring for them until we could sort of organise more support. And I turned up late, and it was typical, right? I just can't work with someone, who's always late, type thing. And I'm thinking that the the need for them to feel, respected would have meant, for me to satisfy that would have meant actually leaving somebody to be unhelped, right? If they will. And I often think of, like, are we missing the power, agency, contribution of introverted people because of that level of, sort of bias, right? Of focus away from what they bring and on how they, bother me.
Mm, good question. I think that applies to all situations where we see somebody as different from us. This is not how I would do things. So it becomes very much focused on what I want, how I do things. And I think the only antidote to that is actually to go the other way and be curious. I wonder why they're late. They're not usually late. I wonder if something happened. Maybe there was an accident. Maybe there's an emergency. And just opening our minds to the possibility that it's not just about us. It's not just about our standards. It's not that people want to offend us or make things difficult for us. It's really nothing to do with us.
Mm.
Each one of us is going out about our lives the best we can. And none of us knows what is going on in somebody else's mind at this point, or
Yeah.
what they're going through, unless you actually sit down and have that conversation. And that conversation is not going to happen unless there is that trust and that safety.
So true. So true. So be curious. That's the antidote to the shame of introversion. So, what, like, we've talked to, perhaps say with a professional frame as well as, your journey, from an external point of view. What's the, like, if I can touch back onto you yourself, Serena, what's the favourite thing about you that you like to experience in the world?
I love how I can look at something and notice details, notice what's incredible, notice people, read, their body language, their tone, and just observe all the things that go on when there's a group of people and everyone's in their own head, in their own world, and just picking up little things that help me understand them better, or
Mm.
help me get a sense of what's happening in this room. And then having the ability to articulate at the right time, in the right way, something that is helpful and productive, especially in a group meeting where there's all these different personalities, maybe conflicting ideas about this is right, that is wrong, this is how to do it. And then just being able to calmly insert my voice at the right time and bring some clarity, and then watching how everybody responds to that. So I find that a fun thing to do.
So that's fun to be present and to be powerful in that moment. Is there like so fun? Is that it? Like contentment, or is that joy?
It's both. I guess it's joyful for me. It's also a, a sense of playfulness, I guess, because it's so different from what people expect you to do. They think the introvert is just sitting there passively, not doing anything, not really contributing. What's happening is all the heavy lifting is going on inside the head of the introvert. And when they're finally ready to say something, ooh, just be ready. Get ready. Something big is coming.
It's I love that. Wow. So when you look at that sort of fun and the sense of reward you have from what you're doing now and how you've used your journey to inform others, what are you looking forward to seeing into the future? How will that manifest, and what else are you looking forward to having pop up into the future in your future?
Well, I look forward to a day when introverts don't have to explain themselves, explain what they are or why they're different, where it becomes natural in running meetings or hosting events to consider the needs of all the different groups.
So we could
So,
do a seating plan for life,
yes,
right? So these are the noisy ones. These are the quiet but powerful. These are the people who need in the middle that believe they're the most important, right? You know, is that
yes, just
everyone would normally?
making room.
Yeah.
That's right, making room for everyone to find their place and to be comfortable and to be safe. So not just open plan offices for everyone. And when you're hosting a conference, not just loud music
Oh,
and terrible acoustics where everything echoes and you
yeah,
have to shout to be heard,
yeah,
but also having those quiet nooks. It's just that level of thoughtfulness and
yeah.
attentiveness to detail. It makes a huge difference.
So across the world, right, we
Mhm.
accommodate the quiet as well as the noisy. Right? So,
Yes, well, there are countries where people are predominantly quiet or introverted. And so the introvert would really enjoy being in those countries, like, Japan or Finland or something where you there's the culture is you don't talk. You don't just make small talk. You sort of keep to yourself, and it's very, very normal. Instead
so
of, let's say, the quiet carriage on a V line train.
yeah, yeah. Well, actually, there's a business idea, introverted travel agency, right? We only go to countries that are
Oh.
quiet. Yeah. So
We'll have to talk more about that, John.
yeah, absolutely. And just to round up your mission, right? You like when you thought about how you were in the golden cage and you realize that you have to break out, set aside all of the work you'd done to that point, and then luckily be able to bring those skills later into doing what you're doing now. How do you like? And so that journey has really informed us and inspired us along the day today, and with your other work. Where you are now, are you pleased with what's happened, where you are, who you are, and where you are both sitting and going? Is that something you're accepting, or is it something that's like work? I guess we're all work in progress. But
We're all work in progress, and the change happens at different speeds in different seasons. But I would say, yes, I'm very pleased. I'm quite proud of myself because even a year ago, compared to where I am currently and how I feel about things currently, that's very different. A lot can happen in a year. And how I was 10 years ago, that's, again, is a very different version of me when we first collaborated on the book.
yeah, that's so true. And of course, I went back, and I should tell everybody it's a really cool book, a hero within, right? Stories of people that you connected with and were you felt had something to offer, and you did a great job on that. And of course, I love the blurb. You get to say you are an Amazon best-selling author, which is so wonderful. And I would recommend that people read that. Not and beautifully, gratefully, I know that I'm in it. I went back and read my chapter, right? So like a little bit of ego dripping out, but I was really pleased in two ways, right? The first was I was pleased I started a journey that you've kind of described your place. But differently. You were so much cleverer because you created the momentum for courage and change from your life, right? I was forced into it by the universe, but I'm so grateful for the worst things that happened to me, right? And the second thing that I got from that story was, sure, I didn't know a lot then, but I loved I was pleased for that John, right? His heart was in the right place, right? And I felt that was an important process that I could reflect and forgive me on that at that early point of my journey. Is that when you look back at all of the things you had to do, is there a reflection? Do you smile on that reflection?
I do. I love the exercise of, sitting with that younger version of myself and just telling that version of myself that I'm so proud of you. I'm so glad you persisted, that you fought back, or you asked questions, or you did this difficult thing, or you went on this particular, this path that nobody else would say was the responsible thing to do at the time. I'm so glad you had the courage. Thank you. And we can say that to all versions, all past versions of ourselves, because they are what have contributed and shaped, the who we are today in this minute having this interview. Every version of us before this has had its purpose.
Wow. A brilliant thought. And from a brilliant lady, thank you so much for the chance to chat again. It's been an absolute joy, and I'm also convinced that the insight and wisdom you've offered today will get out there and make a difference in someone's world. So thank you, Serena Lowe, for your work and for joining us today on Kintsugi Hero Stories That Matter.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Kintsugi Heroes. Thank you to Colin Lilly for permission to use Broken as our theme music for this series. If you enjoyed this conversation, share the podcast with a friend and let us know by leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support Kintsugi Heroes and the stories we share, head to kintsugiheroes.com.au and follow the instructions to make a tax-deductible donation. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.